Hello, today I'm in St Andrew's Church in Boreham in Essex, and I'm at the Sussex Chapel, and I'd like to take you around and talk to you about the three effigies that we have here. And we start in 1516, and it was known in Newhall as Newhall, and it was owned by Anne Boleyn's father, Thomas Boleyn. Newhall is not far from here. Thomas then sold the Newhall to King of England Henry VIII for £1,000 in July 1527. Boreham was awash with royalty and nobles. We had dukes from Norfolk and Suffolk, we had earls from Oxford and Essex and Rutland, and they all stayed at Newhall, and they stayed for 1 month, which was most unusual at that time. And it was here that Henry devised a plan to replace his present wife, Queen Catherine of Aragon, with Anne Boleyn, and the rest is history. By 1573, Elizabeth I has granted Newhall and all its lands to Thomas Radcliffe, the 3rd Earl of Sussex. Radcliffe then went on to install Queen Elizabeth's coat of arms above the main entrance to Newhall, and it still exists there today. Newhall now is a private school. It's one of the oldest Catholic schools, a boarding type school in the world. Oliver Cromwell, he took possession of Newhall for 5 shillings, and his soldiers smashed the effigies that we see here today. They had their noses knocked off, their hands, and for good measure the dogs had their heads lopped off. Now I'm going to read you out some of the history of these earls. So just knowing them as an earl is one thing, but knowing the history is amazing. So the Radfords were incredibly powerful members of the elite to King Henry VII, King Henry VIII, Queen Mary, and Elizabeth I. For example, Robert Radcliffe, who was the first Earl of Sussex, he was Chamberlain to the Exchequer and Lord Great Chamberlain, and also a prominent courtier and soldier to King Henry VII and VIII. Robert Radford, so when he was a young man, he was present at the marriage of Catherine of Aragon and the Prince of Wales in 1501. In 1513, Robert had served in the vanguard in France, and he saw action in 2 sieges. By 1520, he attended the Fields of Gold, or the Fields of the Cloth of Gold, between Henry VIII and Emperor Charles V of France. And this was a way of getting the 2 great power leaders at the time to make a peace pact. In 1524, he was made Knight of the Order of the Garter. In 1520, Robert Radcliffe attended the reception of Anne of Cleves, and King Henry VIII at Blackheath. Robert Radcliffe died on the 27th of November 1542. Now we move on to Henry Radcliffe. Now Henry was son of Robert. And by the age of 21, he had served Cardinal Wolsey, the second most powerful man in the country. And he was a gentleman attendant, and by 1536 he was known as the Viscount Fitzwater and had stewardship of royal estates in Essex. By 1542 he was present at the coronation of Edward VI. By 1553 he was Captain General of the Armed Forces, and Privy Councillor to Queen Mary, and he was also present at a coronation. We'll have a little wander through the church. Henry Radcliffe he'd also taken part in the trials of Lady Jane Grey. And then he was subsequently made Knight of the Garter on the 24th of April 1554. Henry Radcliffe, he died in Cannons Row, London in 1556. His remains were removed and they were reinterred right here in St Andrew's Church, Boreham. Now we move on to the grandson of Robert. He was the third Earl of Essex, Thomas Radcliffe. And as a young man, just like his grandfather, he'd served abroad in the army. By 1551, the age of 26, he was negotiating the marriage between Edward VI and the daughter of King Henry II of France. Thomas must have been seen as a royal matchmaker and diplomatic negotiator, as he was next asked by Queen Mary to arrange the marriage of Philip of Spain. This endeavour earned him the peerage as Baron Fitzwater in August 1553. On returning to England from another mission to the Emperor Charles V, Thomas was then appointed Deputy of Ireland. This was at a time when Ireland was torn by feuds from independent chieftains. By 1557, Thomas had now inherited the title from his deceased father and was the third Earl of Sussex. At this time, Queen Mary had legitimised as a ruling monarch. Thomas then returned to Ireland, and through a series of battles against both the Irish and the Scottish chieftains, Sussex then went on to lay waste to some of the southern Hebrides Islands and plundered settlements of the Scots on the Irish coast. Crossing back across to England after Queen Mary's death, Thomas Radcliffe, the third Earl, of Sussex, he attended the coronation of Queen Elizabeth I in January 1559. In the following years, Queen Elizabeth I sent Thomas back to Ireland, now as Lord Lieutenant, and by 1562, with a certain measure of success, England had a certain amount of influence in Ireland. On returning to England, Thomas was once again asked to go on a mission. But this time it was for a more personal nature. Elizabeth I wanted to marry Archduke Charles. This quickly failed to materialise. By 1568, Elizabeth I appointed Thomas to the title Lord President of the North. His task was to quell two rebellious earls, Northumberland and Westmoreland. By 1570, Thomas Radcliffe had laid waste to the border, invaded Scotland and raided Dumfries. The rebels, the leaders, and their armies surrendered. Thomas was then promoted to Lord Chamberlain and was from then on in attendance to Queen Elizabeth I, right up until his death on the 9th of June 1583. He died at his house in Bermondsey in London. He was buried 1 month later right here at Boreham in Essex, along with his father and his grandfather. His brother, It was Sir Henry Radcliffe. He succeeded him as 4th Earl of Sussex. And I have a feeling he's also buried here. And beneath this series of effigies lays a tomb. And in that tomb are 12 further coffins of the Radcliffe family. I'm just going to remove a rucksack and we'll have a closer look at this magnificent piece of work. So you've got the 3 Radcliffes. I'm not sure who's who. But they are different. If you look at the carving, there's the ear exposed there. And on this one, the ear is covered and there's slightly different beards. And you can see magnificent, slightly different ruff, which goes right up onto the beard. And you can see the armour. Look at the carving there, you get the tools in there. You've got the plate protection mail plate armour there. And there's a series of holes, and I guess there would have been some kind of metal adornment there. As we work our way down, the sheath for the sword, which has been chopped off, the original sword would have been there. See if we can get this side. You can see it more clearly there. Detail. More detail here. Got some sort of leather strap. And even initials carved in there. And so on, so on. Looks like a foot's been reattached at some point. Then they rest on, they are apes. I thought they looked a bit strange. They're resting on some sort of carpet, which again, the detail. Everything's made in marble. You've got black marble surrounding it and the inserts. Some of this marble comes from Egypt. It's incredibly expensive. On the panels on the sides, it's got Latin, which I'll read to you in a minute. I can't read Latin, but there's an English transcript. Then you've got original panels that would have been brass, I guess, been pulled off. All this damage is done by Oliver Cromwell's men. I guess they would have used pole axes or axes, give it a good whack. You can see the top of it, you can actually see where they've hit it a couple of times. These dogs, I believe, are wearing the crowns as collars, and you can see chains. Same with this one. You can clearly see where it's been hacked. I guess they could have used a bolster and a hammer. And again, magnificent work, however you look at it. Big chunk taken out of there. I'm not sure if this is from Egypt, I'm not sure. Again, Latin panels, amazing detail. This could rival anything that was in Westminster Abbey, no shadow of a doubt. If you look, you can see the hinges of the armour, where the hands have come off. And some of this damage may well have come from the roof falling in, because this was neglected as a chapel. There was an argument about, I don't exactly know what, but it was neglected for a long time, and eventually the roof collapsed. You can see the hinges. There's no cheating going on here, none at all. Hinges, fine belt, and you can imagine that in the day this would have been, in the real world, this would have been highly decorative in colours. These people would have been much feared and admired as they went around. And they were definitely here. And don't know if that's a stirrup. We move on to the apes on the end. This one you can see has been chopped here. And if you see what it should look like, more rounded here, and the same again here. And again, more detail, it just carries on, there's no cheating. There's holes in here, so I'm guessing there would have been a plaque there, and the same across here, it's been pulled off. Same again here, and this would have had a plaque. If I set that on there, I'll read out what the description, the translation says. It says, translation of the Latin inscription. This is a left panel from here. After death shall be the judgment, when the names of the righteous shall be made manifest, and the actions of the wicked displayed. Henry Radcliffe, Earl of Sussex, Viscount Fitzwater, Baron Egremont and Burnell, an honourable knight of the most noble order of the Garter, Chief Justice and Ranger of all the forests, royal forests, parks, chases and warrens, on this side of the Trent, Lord Lieutenant of the counties of Norfolk and Suffolk, Captain General of the forces of Queen Mary, at which time he rescued her from the disorders that affected the beginnings of her reign. Upon the conclusion of hostilities in France and all his embassies there, he was honoured among the chief of the nobility, and in all negotiations, both of peace and war, he esteemed one of the first of ambassadors. He never displayed the most convincing testament of constancy, religion and fidelity. Most particularly at his departure, he died February the 1st, 1556. He espoused Elizabeth, daughter of Duke of Norfolk, and Anne, daughter of Philip Havrop in Kent. Just like to add that this flag, now we know that the Americans love English history, and this flag could not be in a better place for them. This was donated from a gentleman in America, basically for the forces, the American forces that had aircraft in Boreham airfield during World War II. And you can see it's in fine condition. And those young Americans and British that were from that base, because I believe the American planes were used to drop some of the English lads, the paratroopers. So you can imagine them coming here and looking exactly the same thing that I'm looking at now. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. And thank you very much.